it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, your host. And these are exciting times to have a UFO show. I'm really glad I have a microphone, and I'm not the guy on the pulpit, but other people may be, and they're invited on the show. But I'm the guy who will be interviewing some people that have a really good weigh-ins on what's been going on ever since that story was released in the New York Times. It's been a different world, I think. So Alejandro Rojas, who typically joins us, I just found out he's taking an extended Christmas vacation. And speaking of Christmas, I hope all of you that celebrate Christmas had a wonderful one. And it'll be New Year's Eve before the next show, so I hope you have a very safe and wonderful New Year's Eve coming up. So the show tonight, we have Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Marden, and they're going to, in the first hour or so, we're going to be weighing in on the Pentagon's UFO search, and then after that, we're going to be talking exclusively about the Betty and Barney Hill case. That's something I've never really done with these two together, so that'll be exciting, and we are taking calls. If you have a pen and paper and you're listening live, you want to call later on in the show after the first half hour, dial 603-967-4030. And would love to get some questions in the first hour of the show regarding this the Pentagon UFO search. That would be a great thing. So welcome to the show, both Kathy and Stan. I'm so glad to have you on.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
Yes, that's right. So I was thinking about you, just wondering what your thoughts were when all of this was kind of going down, Stan. So what do you think about this whole thing?
Well, I was frankly enormously surprised. I was delighted. I thought it was handled very well. I was surprised, as a matter of fact. I had heard Tom DeLonge. I had read his book, and he seemed to be short on evidence, a lot of story. But I think he handled this release extremely well. And the other guys with him, Elizondo and so forth, I was very impressed. It's the most impressive single UFO event I've seen in a very long time. And I was very pleased about it. I had calls about it. I mean, there were a lot of things that we didn't talk about, that they didn't talk about, but still. It looked like a whole new ball game, to tell you the truth. Like when government guys with fancy titles come on board and say we had the secret program going for, 5 years, that's pretty big news because it's been a long time, and you can't help but respond to them. They're not guys making up stories. I was so impressed to see Harry Reid. He was a senator for 30 years, for goodness sakes.
Right.
The majority leader, when he comes on so straight and square, and, this was a good show. And, I was, how shall I put this? I'm a very forward kind of guy. I'm not accountable to anybody but me. And so I was disappointed, in a sense, that none of the other people were quite willing to go out on the limb of saying alien. They almost got there, but they stopped short. I think they're still thinking that people won't accept that. And I reject that viewpoint. I've been out there. Nobody's talked in more places and more hours than I have, I don't think. And I just don't worry. I don't get a hard time for saying some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Remember, you got to ask the right questions. Nobody's saying all UFOs are alien spacecraft. I hope nobody's saying that. But so I was a little put off by the pussyfooting around, so to speak. You notice how they avoided the word alien and ET and so forth. But that's okay. They'll get as their feet get wetter, they'll realize it's okay. So I think it's a whole new ballgame in ufology. I just wish I was 20 years younger.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I heard George Knapp say, it's changed everything, and I think it has. And as far as what you're saying there about the alien aspect of it or the possibility of it, I noticed that a lot of times when it doesn't matter who is being interviewed, the interviewer is trying to corner people into saying that. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I did, and I was, as I say, nobody took the bait, so to speak. But that's okay. Look, it took me a long while when I first got started to realize that it's okay to stand up and be counted, to put your facts on the table, to draw a conclusion. And I know there are a lot of people that still don't want to do that. They're afraid for some reason. What do you got to lose? I don't have anything to lose because I'm only accountable to me.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take Kathy, too, sometimes.
So, Kathy, let's hear your
name's on the book, too.
Oh, pardon me.
That's right.
Yeah. Kathy, let's hear what your thoughts are on, I know you've been following this real closely as well.
Yes. In the beginning, I was cautiously pleased. I wanted to know more about it and to know for certain that this was not some kind of misinformation or disinformation. And the more I learned, the more elated I became, because this was a study that had 36 thick reports with hundreds of pages in each report, and 36 technical reports to go along with them. So there is a lot of information there. And of course, a lot of it's still classified. We'll see how much can be declassified. And as I was listening, I noted that Luis Elizondo would say, this is what I can tell you, and of course I can't go further than that because it's still classified. So that was important for me to hear. I know that there is a lot more. The fact that this was tracked by the most sophisticated radar system in the world, I think is really very important. It takes millions of dollars just to train the military people who use the weapon sensor. It's, what is it called? Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod is
very
what it's
well
called. Done. But it is the most powerful tracking lasers in the world. And that's really important because Harry Reid did make the statement, quote, "I'm very glad because now we have scientific evidence." So he was actually willing to say that. He was willing to take that step. And that's really important too. And I would encourage all of these men who are working on this project to take a look at our history of the investigation of flying discs dating back to 1947. We have a tremendous amount of evidence that these things have been investigated in 1947 by the Air Materiel Command. And way back then, they said that they could outfly anything that we had, that they were real and not visionary or fictitious, shaped like a disc. largest man-made craft. They had extreme rates of climb and maneuverability. They were metallic or light reflecting. They were circular or elliptical, flat on the bottom, domed on the top. So they did quite an extensive study way back in 1947. And the big question they were asking then is, could this be Russia's aircraft? They did investigate that, and then they found out that it didn't belong to the Soviet Union. So what could they say by deduction is that it was nothing that they knew of that was manufactured on our planet and was far superior to what we have. And that's the same thing that they're saying today in this new study. So I would hope that they would go back and take a look at this, because there's a lot of evidence that they really should look at, including Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. And Stan, you might want to take that
yeah,
lead.
one of the things that was interesting about the program is that the things that weren't included, there was no reference to General Bollander's statement, Air Force General, 1968. Reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. That was an incredible statement. And if we close Project Blue Book, this is in 1968. We didn't know about it until 10 years later. But he said, if we close Project Blue Book, the public won't have a place to report sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. That was way back then. And so it was kind of funny that none of that was mentioned. And Special Report 14 wasn't mentioned. There are a number of things that we have to recognize here, though. Look at the titles of those, 5 guys who were speaking out, Elizondo and so forth. Very impressive to me, anyway. We're talking about the first team here, not guys who came along for the ride, and they had guts. And I was delighted to see that. We haven't had that kind of people put up in front of the public, really, before. Do you think? I don't think. I can't remember a time when such impressive people were put in front of us. And so, and of course, you expected some of the nonsense from Dr. Tyson, for example. And these guys, the SETI community, can't seem to understand that there might be reasons for aliens to want to come to planet Earth. They talk about all aliens would do would be to walk around, have fun, meet people, blah, blah, blah. Hey, this is a planet on which 50 million people were killed in a war. One war. 50 million people.
Yeah.
It's a planet on which 2,000 nuclear warheads have been exploded. That means that we know about nuclear fusion. Fusion can be used to go to the stars. So everybody in the neighborhood knows there's a bunch of idiots over there on Earth. And look, they should be able to get here. That's not a happy thought. So there's a real world here, part of a local galactic neighborhood, I like to call it. And so I'm pleased that this took on a whole new tone. Don't you think it did, Kathy? It sounded different to me.
It absolutely did. In the past, we've had a little bit said by politicians, for example, or maybe scientists, but not a great deal. But now the Academy, the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, has some pretty high-powered people. Chris Mellon, who's part of the Mellon family, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Security and Information Operations and Intelligence Policy. Hal Puthoff, I don't know if you've heard of his name before, Martin. But that is a big name. The CIA's Extrasensory Perception Project, remote viewing at Stanford Institute with other big names like Ingo Swann and Russell Targ. I'm really glad that he's there because that's going to be very important. Stephen Justice from Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, Jim Semivan, CIA Director of Operations. You have some high-powered people, and Luis Elizondo, who, of course, was the Pentagon official who ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
And they stated $22 million.
Yes.
I know, which is
usually put numbers on these things.
I heard someone say that's like a few lunches at the Pentagon.
Well, yeah. I mean, let me give you a number to compare it to. When I was working on nuclear airplanes in 1958, our budget that year at General Electric was $100 million.
And
we
what
employed
year?
3,400 people. 1958.
My God, that's like
and we employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. Yeah. So there have been huge programs, but for UFO research over a 5-year period. And this is the first time we really had definitive statement about security levels. Did you notice that they made a real point of saying that this was top secret and so forth? And in the past, I've heard, quote, experts, unquote, say that there's nothing classified about flying saucers. We've been told everything that's going on. And that's obviously baloney. And I was glad to see it come out that way. I mean, that, hey, here's the real story, and there's more to it, and we haven't gotten that out yet.
Oh, yeah.
When are we going to see all those reports?
Not only that, there's supposed to be 12 more videos, or 12 altogether, which will be really exciting. And I want to talk a little bit about the videos in just a minute. But one thing I want to bring up is, I'm sure that you were paying attention, both you, Kathy and Stan, when this thing came out in October. It's just, I find it kind of interesting. Alejandro and I were talking, wow, this is a guy from the government. And, we were talking on our show, both of our shows, about how substantial this was. But it didn't really get the push until that wonderful article came out in the New York Times. And
That's
I'm just
right.
wondering, I mean, it really makes you wonder why no other media picked it up until, Leslie Kean got involved along with Ralph Blumenthal. And but anyway, why do you think it just did not take off? And if it wasn't for that article, everything would be the same.
Well, the article gives you a frame of reference. If it's in the New York Times, it's got to be true, right?
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
substantial,
We've never had that kind of a stamp of approval on something coming out.
Yeah.
And so, I still want to know what caused this to come out now. Somebody had to say something somewhere. Now is the time. And I don't know whether it was Elizondo, although he seemed to be one of the major actors here. And finally glad to get it out. It's about time. But it took courage for somebody to take that big step. And I'm so glad that it's happened.
Right.
And I hope there's more to come, of course.
Yeah,
I am too.
Yeah, this is something I brought up while talking to Alejandro the other day, and it's kind of like we're at a point where there has to be a strike while the iron's hot, or something has to keep this thing alive enough to get enough people to pay attention to it. Well,
I'm hoping that people will take a cue from this, and more of them will be coming forth, but probably after the first of the year. This is a very busy time of year for news and things going on. So I think things will have to calm down a little, and then they'll need stories.
Yeah.
So we'll get back on this one, I think.
And I have to say that on one of the news stations, I'm not sure if it was CNN or Fox, but it was one of the ones that I was watching. The news commentator said, until recently, this could not be discussed on public news. So maybe there has been a policy change And I'm hoping that that is what has happened, and that the news can now cover this sort of thing.
Wow.
I hope so. It's time. It's past time, way past time. But again, I'm still looking for somebody somewhere had to make a decision. Was it Elizondo, or is there somebody else lurking there?
Yeah. I've talked about this with other people as well, and it's like, I don't want to say that anything was scripted, but there was probably some type of guidelines on what someone like him could actually reveal.
Well, normally you have security guides for any classified program. You have a detailed tabulation of what is classified and what isn't. And so somebody had to say, spell those things out. But whoever did, this is a breakthrough, and let's hope it continues. Now, of course, we'll get people like Tyson saying silly things. But I was very pleased to see Billy Cox and George Knapp, two of the best UFO journalists around, come out very strongly in written form and in details. And they have a following. And I'm so pleased that they're on board.
Right.
It's going to happen next month.
Well, I saw Tyson talk about this on CNN, and I was not. I was actually impressed that he didn't go the way he normally goes into this whole debunking mode and like it's crazy. And I thought he was fairly level-headed. He said a couple of semi-condescending things, but for the most part, he said, well, maybe it should be investigated. I was actually kind of shocked when he said that.
Coming from him, that was very shocking. I mean, remember, he has a history on this subject way back when. He said the proof that the government can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia.
Yeah, right.
Which is an utterly stupid remark,
yeah.
Frankly. He doesn't understand security. He doesn't understand interstellar travel. People think that somehow astronomers know something about interstellar travel. They don't. They know that there are stars out there and planets and things like that. They don't know how to get there. We didn't get into space because the astronomers were designing and building space systems. In spite of them, they look. And way back in 1956, the British Astronomer Royal said space travel is utter bilge. What good would it do? Who's going to pay for it? We should spend money on good equipment for astronomy. That was a year before Sputnik. And the field that is benefited the most from the space program has been astronomy. But, also, astronomers don't seem to have any concept of exploration, of why would people go someplace. Columbus wasn't looking to meet with his cousins, for goodness sakes. And the history of discovery is people having guts enough to ask new questions, to stick their necks out, to look for answers. And the astronomical community has been opposed all along. It's amazing to look at their books. And their absence, Dr. Seth Shostak, he chimed in the other day, too. It's kind of like he said on one program very recently, because I won the debate when he and I debated, well, that doesn't prove I was right. That doesn't deal with the evidence at all.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of on the skeptic side, someone sent me a clip about an hour ago with James Oberg, and he's you oftentimes you can see his debunkings, and something you have mentioned before, Stan. I've heard you say this: when you can't attack the evidence, you attack the person. That's what debunkers tend to do. And sure enough, he went right for Leslie Kean, saying, because the Chile, UFO was not good, that this is very similar to it. And that is absolute bull, because that was 50 miles, away from the camera in that particular case. And it was a new camera they were using and all that. There was a lot of things involved. And for him to say that, is just kind of ridiculous.
Well, it's one of the basic rules. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If it can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. We heard a lot of that over the past 2 weeks. Investigation is too much trouble. And that's one of the problems that the SETI community, silly effort to investigate. Somebody came up with another one the other day, which I thought was good, but I can't remember what it was. But they insist, ignore all the evidence that relates to there being extraterrestrials here on planet Earth. Talk about life out there, but they ain't coming here, folks. Mm-hmm. Which is so silly. We have all kinds of evidence, but you noticed the other night that nobody mentioned the physical trace cases.
Yeah.
Nobody mentioned a lot of radar visual sightings. There are all kinds of... Look, did you notice that there was no mention that the NSA released 156 top-secret Umbre UFO documents on which you can read one sentence per page? That's the NSA. Mm-hmm. I think these guys think it means no such agency. I don't know. They also... There was no mention of Blue Book Special Report 14, only data on 3,201 sightings. And you notice when they showed the Navy pilot footage, after a while, they only showed the object standing still. And to me, what was so impressive about that is how suddenly, zip, the thing goes off at a very high rate of speed after... Now, we don't have things that can move very rapidly and hover.
Right.
But they didn't show that part of it anymore. It was kind of like, hey, you missed the point, guys.
Well, also, along those lines, Stan, I heard George Knapp has done a wonderful job with this, and I highly respect him. But on one interview, someone said, well, couldn't this be technology, from, another country? And he said, sure, it could be China or Russia or something. That is a possibility, but that is disregarding all the past, all the way back, like you mentioned, to 1947. All the craft that could do spectacular things, that there's no way that we could have had the technology anywhere in any country would be hidden that long.
No, because if you have the technology, you want to use it to threaten your neighbors.
That's right.
Isn't that the name of the game?
Yeah. So, Kathy,
yes.
when you were, did you watch actually when Tom DeLonge had his little thing back in October? Did you see that as well? Yes. You did. And in general, what did you think of all the people that were, you were mentioning the different names. I think Chris Mellon, who was actually on this show at one time, I think he's one of the more substantial of them all. Mm-hmm. And yes. And you mentioned the Mellon family. Now, I had someone contact me, and they said that Chris Mellon, I just thought this was a really funny statement. Chris Mellon, how can you trust him? It shows a 12-year gap on his LinkedIn for an occupation. And I wrote him back and I said, well, he's a Mellon. He can do whatever he wants.
Right.
I lived in Pittsburgh, and yes, the Mellons can do whatever they want.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. And Tom DeLonge put together a really high-powered group of individuals to work on this. And boy, I have to take my hat off to him. He has done an incredible job with this. And I didn't think he was going to be able to pull it off. And it appears that he has.
Yeah, there's been a lot of...
Right on.
There's been a lot of bashing of Tom DeLonge. Because, people are saying, I think the feeling is that, he hasn't been really involved in the UFO field, and here he comes, because he's, famous and popular and has money, and here he comes along, and I think there may be a little bit of jealousy, but also
yes.
He, some of his own personal views are kind of out there, and I can understand where it makes people a little leery. But boy, he did knock this one out of the park after all said and done.
Yes.
Yes, and when I heard him speak about evil aliens early on, and on some of the radio shows that he was on, I was very apprehensive about what he had up his sleeve and exactly what he was doing. But considering the individuals on this Academy of Arts and Science, I'm impressed with the group of individuals he has.
Yes. Yes, I've never seen a more high-powered group in their presentations, and I've watched a lot of presentations, and these guys knew what they had to say, and they said it well. And Tom, I was not expecting a lot from Tom, but I thought he did a bang-up job. And so it was a pleasure for me. I didn't have to say, ooh, why did he say that? Which is my usual comment with this sort of thing. But
yeah.
I was very favorably impressed. And, I don't know how much coverage the story got overall on the media. I'm sure some places played it a lot bigger. But I was frankly surprised that it got started with the New York Times. I mean, Leslie has done things there, but still, I saw the comments in one of the articles by the guy from the New York Times, how they went over it, and they had to be convinced to do it, and so forth and so on. And what he seemed to be saying is we did our due diligence. And that's nice to know, because there have been times in the past when the New York Times has not.
Well, any media seems to... yeah. Their standards seem, well, in a lot of media, their standards of journalism, they could use some refresher courses, I think.
Yes.
So, Stan, one of the things I wanted to ask you, in all your years that you've been looking at this topic, is there any equivalent to what has just happened?
Well, I don't think so, although it's tempted to say, well, there were the congressional hearings of 1968 where 12 scientists presented the story of flying saucers. It didn't get a lot of publicity at the time, but it was impressive overall. If you read those hearings, and I was the only one without a PhD of the 12 guys who were presenting.
Wow.
That's pretty powerful stuff. Mm-hmm. But it didn't make as big a splash. It was like people are so reluctant. Look, I'll admit, when I gave my first year's worth of lectures way back in the mid-'60s, I was wary. I kept waiting for somebody to give me a really hard time or to be able to knock me out of the park, so to speak. And it didn't happen. I was relieved. But there was a whole year there where I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak. And here, these guys proceeded on doing their thing, and no shoes dropped. And, I think Dr. Tyson, if anybody looks at what he actually said, he screwed up. He didn't say anything useful. He showed no imagination. And I think why you're talking science and imagination. But you have to stop to think, why? Why secrecy? Why would aliens come here? It's not a game. We have a long history on this planet of beings from one place, one country, giving a hard time to beings from another country. And so we see that all the time. We have aliens coming here who you expect them to land on a White House lawn? This is the first time in recent history, as far as we know, that we've been in a real position to say, if we want to go to the stars, we can. And turn that around. What do you think the aliens think about that? They would be concerned as all get out about us. Our track record is terrible. We keep forgetting that. We're nice guys. Everybody knows that. Well, we're not.
Well, we have no way to tell whether they're nice guys like us either.
They haven't attacked us yet, though.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying we know what the future holds, whether they're going to give us another year and say, we've given them enough time, forget about it, wipe it out. We don't know. But you can make a case that if you have a sufficiently advanced civilization, that it knows some history about its own beings in the neighborhood, that they've decided that getting along is better than throwing H-bombs at each other, don't you think?
Right.
At some point, you've got to make that decision. Because if you don't, we are going to be throwing H-bombs, and we're going to be gone. So I'm a rationalist. I think the aliens are going to act sensibly. And I'm particularly intrigued by the times that they have showed up near nuclear weapons testing.
Right.
Near nuclear installations. And it's not because I'm a nuclear physicist, but nuclear energy gives us a means to go out there and bother them. And if I were an alien, I'd be very worried about that. As long as we were stuck on our own planet, I can see where the aliens say, let the kids play their silly games. But as soon as you say they've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons, which we have, suddenly the whole local neighborhood is within reach. And that's one thing that has really changed since I began work in ufology. Our concept of how many planets there are and how many, are in the neighborhood has changed drastically. Frank Drake said not too many years ago there might be as many as 8,000 planets out there. Now we're talking 8 billion.
It's probably a lot more.
The ball game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the limit. At least 8 billion in our own little galaxy. So what I'm saying is our status, we are guaranteed. I can't believe we're not of concern to others in the galaxy, in our neighborhood, because of our behavior. 2,000 nuclear weapons is putting a lot of stuff out there.
Right. So I would like to ask what you thought about Bob Bigelow's side, his part of this whole thing. Also, because you mentioned the senator, and I know there was a connection there. But also, if either one of you have heard anything about the metals that are, the unusual metals that are housed there.
I listened to, I know Bob Bigelow. I got the first research grant that he made a lot of years ago. I'm pleased about that, and I was very favorably impressed with him. Not because of the $1 billion, that's impressive enough, but I mean because of how he handled things, how he could make decisions, how he was rational and didn't interfere. He went along on our first research trip, and he didn't interfere, and that was a point some of the other people didn't want him to go. But I was very impressed. Now, that was one part that was confusing, because at one point they said something about the composition of the materials, and at the other point they've got materials, but it sounded as if they did know what they were. Knowing what something is doesn't mean you can duplicate it. It's easy to say, but that doesn't mean you can, I want 3 pounds of that. Forget it. It's like separating uranium isotopes. Oh, you need U-235. Well, it's only 0.7%. No way to worry about that. Oh, yeah? Well, we spent an awful lot of money and effort to build facilities to separate that tiny amount, less than 0.7%. And make it 90% enriched, which is one heck of a jaunt from the beginning to end. Very expensive. So what I'm saying is that we are in a situation where we have to recognize how we look to them, and we also have to recognize how we look to each other. We're all earthlings. Who's going to decide how we proceed from here? And that is of great concern to me. Where's the forum? Who's going to run the show?
Right. Well, it's kind of like if we were indeed had contact, who would be, who would represent the Earth? as well.
Good question.
Yes, absolutely.
I certainly don't. No, I'm not going to I'm not going to go there. About the president.
Oh,
Yeah, not good. I get a lot of mail if I say anything about that. So we had a question that came in, and it was directed to you, Stan. They wanted to know what you thought about the fundraising part of To the Stars. What your thoughts were about that?
Well, I'm still wanting to know how much money they raised and where they raised it from. Frankly, obviously somebody spent some money on this thing, and I have to give them credit for being able to do that. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it takes money to put on a dog and pony show, as some people used to say. You have to do a nice job, which they did the other day. The production on the stage there was very well done, I thought. That took effort, it took money, it took somebody committing themselves to let's get it done right. And so I'm still trying to figure out how much money did they spend. I mean, $22 million, at one point somebody said that was a year, which is not the case. It was all told in the 5-year period, I guess. But I'm still very curious. Has anybody heard any stories about where the dough come from? It's not that Bigelow couldn't afford it, but I think there'd be a lot of people worried about having one man having all the irons in the fire. You know what I mean?
Right, but just a little confusion there, Stan. The question the person was asking that Tom DeLonge had a fund drive when he was starting that. Actually, someone's calling in now. Why don't I take this call? And it may be the person that wanted to ask that question.
Okay.
Caller, you are live. Your first name and where are you calling from?
Is this me?
That's you,
Steve?
yes.
Hey, how you guys doing?
What's your first name?
Steve.
Hi, Steve. You have a question for our guests?
I did. I mean, I had a sighting when I was a kid, so I'm a believer. As the saying goes, I know what I saw. But I can't help being concerned about one thing with all this. As a longtime systems engineer, I mean, this is like the perfect honeypot. And the whole thing with a honeypot is legitimacy. And, we've had so much trouble in the world with the hacking, with the state-sponsored hacking, the election, just before that, North Korea with hacking Sony. And so in systems engineering, there's a notion called creating a honeypot, something that's just too tempting, so that people couldn't resist and couldn't resist cutting loose their own teams to try and get more information. And you would have partners in that who are witting and unwitting, to create that honeypot. And you've seen the movie Wag the Dog with Robert De Niro?
Mm-hmm.
Where
I didn't either.
Well, they create a circumstance that lets the president of the United States off the hook for a major crisis, and they do it with one video of a video going down a chimney, and of a bomb going down a chimney, and they're selling this idea. They're going to create a war to get the public distracted from what's really going on, and I just and so they fake a war, and they have one video, and really what we've seen on CNN is that one video, and it's very compelling, and I just can't help but wonder if this isn't them creating a honeypot, basically.
So, Stan, do you understand his question?
Well, I do, and I don't have an answer for him. I can't say that it's impossible. With all the manipulations that there have been on this planet, over the last, just make it 20 years, no less 200 years. There are all kinds of possibilities. But I was very impressed by the quality of the people who were involved. These are guys who've had very responsible positions and had to be trusted, and they were high security positions. And, maybe it's foolish having had a clearance for 14 years, but I think it's a strong control on people that they're doing things under security. And you sign on to keeping your mouth shut and doing all kinds of other things. You take it very seriously. Somebody who hasn't had a clearance may not realize what a big impact it is on an individual when he finds out about stuff that he can't tell anybody about, and where the penalties for doing that are very severe. It scares you. You got to watch what you're doing. You got to be careful. I was impressed with that stuff.
I just want to say, it seems like, we're all so eager for this to be true. And it just, for what we have seen, the video on CNN, we've gotten one video out of them, and I hope there's a lot more coming. And that's
Kathy, what was that number of how many reports?
Well, they had 36 reports. That was part of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
Do we have that?
36 thick reports with hundreds of pages and 36 technical reports. That is according to Luis Elizondo. And no, we don't have all of that. They have only been able to get the information that has been released
right,
through the Freedom of
declassified.
Information Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So they don't have all of the information. And they are, I guess, very slowly going to release the information that they have. It's my understanding that they have 3 videos. They have shown one, I'm trying to think of what it was called. The
gimbal.
The gimbal,
Yeah.
yes. And then there was the one from the Nimitz. And so there's another one that should be coming out. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, and I heard I've heard that Elizondo has up to 12 of them that he was able to secure, but whether he can only show these 3 right now, I'm not sure. Steve, thanks so much for the call. I thought it was Steve. I thought it was Steve. Perhaps I got his name wrong and he didn't answer. Anyway, so the line is open if someone would like to call and ask our guests some questions. The number is 603-967-4030. So I think I was understanding the caller was calling the video the honeypot. I think that's what he was saying. And like you said, Kathy, there's more to come on that. And let's talk a little bit about the video, though, right now, because I'm going to pull this up on YouTube so people can see it. So there's people, I don't want to say debunking or trying to debunk or bashing the video. I don't know. Have either one of you heard of anything about that?
Well, I did hear somebody saying something, and my immediate reaction was, hey, wait a minute. They're at 20,000 feet. They made it sound like it was, a whole movie project here on the ground. It wasn't like that at all. This is very special equipment, very special circumstances, and very sophisticated people involved. And we had the live recording, which I found rather fascinating. You don't often get to hear those from this sort of thing. Right. I mean, a Navy pilot flying a very expensive jet and using very sophisticated equipment, to have that out in the open is a big step forward. And I hope that means there's going to be more like that.
Right.
And Commander David Favor had 16 years experience and over 3,500 hours of flying time, specially trained. And, what those men were describing was incredible, that the craft came in at supersonic speed. It's stopped at 80,000 feet. It dropped to 20,000, and then it dropped again and stopped 50 feet above the ocean.
Right.
It was moving back and forth like a pong ball hitting a wall, and accelerating at incredible speed, moving in ways that we cannot. They were breaking our aerodynamic rules, our laws of physics as we understand them. This is really something very special.
Yes, very special indeed.
And, a lot of people talk about the G-force. Of course, that if, a being was inside that, there's no way that it could survive as we know it.
Wait a minute.
As we understand it.
No, the kicker is, what you need to understand is that there isn't a fixed number, how many Gs can you stand. It depends, how many Gs you can stand depends on the direction of the force with regard to the body. And notice the astronauts go up on their back, not foot to head.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the duration of the force and the direction with regard to the body and the magnitude of the force. Now, there's some crazy numbers here. You can actually stand, and there are measurements to show this, you can stand 30 Gs for 1 second. 1 second. That's 0 to 600 miles an hour.
Wow.
In 1 second. That's pretty splendid, pretty shocking. A trained pilot can perform a tracking task at 14 Gs for 2.5 minutes. And you think about that for a minute. That doesn't sound like long, but it does to me. What I'm saying is you design systems, and also another aspect here, we haven't talked about plasma propulsion, that is having a plasma around a vehicle, ionized air around a vehicle. But it turns out there's an enormous amount of work, which you don't hear about in the open very much, that shows that with an ionized air region around a craft, and you have controlling magnetic and electric fields, you can control lift, drag, heating, sonic boom production, all of those things.
Yes.
So that's not some other world's technology. Maybe it is, but I mean, that's real world. So one of my rules is that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things. So it's too quick to say that we couldn't do it, or we can't stand it, or it violates the laws of physics. No, we're talking about new technologies. We're always violating the laws of physics. If you say the way we could do things before, it sets the limit. And so you got to be real careful about that. We've got a lot to learn yet.
Yeah. That's...
I'm not volunteering for that 30G mission.
And I would like to say something if I can.
Sure.
Way back in 1961, as Barney Hill stood and looked at that craft, he described it appearing to bounce back and forth. He compared it to a ball on a rubber band that's connected to a paddle, and you hit the ball on the paddle, and it flies out, and then it comes back. It was the same kind of motion way back in 61, and there were non-humans aboard that craft.
Yeah, I know it is like we can't understand, first of all, how they get here. Also, the spectacular things that people have been reporting for decades of the speeds, the sharp turns, the disappearing and reappearing, all those strange things that people are reporting. We haven't, we don't have a clue of exactly how they're doing.
Well, we do. We do have some clues.
Okay.
We can do a lot of stuff now, and that's why I mentioned nuclear fusion. Look, it's kind of like going from dynamite, TNT. Wow, a big bomb in 1944, 10-ton blockbuster, released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. Wow. Well, the first A-bomb the next year, 15,000 tons of dynamite. The first H-bomb, 1952, 10 million tons of dynamite. And the Russians sent one off, Tsar Bomba, I love that name, 57 million tons of dynamite. One stinking bomb.
Right. Could take out Texas,
Scared
I've
the hell
heard.
out of me.
Yeah. If that's the one I
Well-
think you're talking about, they said it's big enough to destroy Texas, basically.
Well, the fireball alone on that one was 3 miles wide. That's just the fireball. That's not the area of destruction, which is much bigger than that. But remember, the Russians got Siberia, which they got a lot of empty space, so what the heck? But what I'm saying is, look at that progression from 10 tons to 57,000 tons. That's a big jump.
Right.
But remember, fusion is what drives all the energy in the universe. That's what goes on in the stars. I'm not saying there's not something better that we will eventually find, but the jump between burning gas, and setting off a fusion device, and I worked on fusion propulsion for deep space travel in 1962.
Wow.
So it's not a new idea. It'll be expensive. Okay, everything is expensive. But what I'm saying is we haven't reached the limits of what we know already, and we've got a lot more to learn. I'm always an optimist. We will learn more. We haven't reached the limit. And the history of technology development has been reaching out and finding new ways of doing things. There was a study, just to give you an example, in the 40s. Professor Campbell figured out what the weight would be of a rocket able to get a man to the moon and back. 1 million tons, he said. And sorry, the trouble is the Saturn V weighed 3,000 tons. He was a little wrong. He didn't know his technology.
I see where you're going.
Also,
yeah.
It only takes a year at 1G to get to the speed of light. And I've tried this little experiment. Ask my audiences, how many think it would take 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, 1 year at 1G to get to the speed of light? And I've had many of these were professional people who thought it took 1,000 years at 1G to get to the speed of light. It's less than 1 year. That's the real world. I mean, sorry if that shocks people, if it bothers people, but that's the way it is.
Stan, we have another caller just called in. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
Andrew from Stratford, Connecticut.
Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the show. And do you have a question for our guests?
Thank you. I do. Or maybe just some Stanton's thoughts on the state of affairs with science today and the scientific community, how people like Tyson and Shostak and others seem to really send out the perception to the public that, like a lot of scientists in the past who say foolish things moments before some amazing discovery is made, they always have a condescending or, kind of a know-it-all attitude.
Yes.
But really, there's just a tremendous amount of information and knowledge we do not have yet. Gravity, light, photons, particle duality, all these things. And they'd have you think that right now we're always at the ultimate, at the mountain peak of human knowledge.
Since Roman time.
We're certainly not. The progress, as I said, comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. And you don't have to look very far to see it. And the history was, Kathy and I did a book, Science Was Wrong, 14 chapters. We each did 7, I think. And each one stimulated by some very smart person saying something very stupid. A man would never fly in a vehicle that was closed, maybe in a balloon. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight.
Right.
Another one said that space travel is utter bilge. Great astronomer said that. What good would it do? Nobody can do it, and the next year Sputnik went up. And that's the thing, that if we look in all directions, we don't fly, we don't set speed records now with propeller-driven airplanes. We got jets and we got rockets. Progress comes from doing things differently. And it costs money. Okay, that's the way things go. It costs money.
Right. So just one final thought, and then I'll take your answer off the air. Would be that maybe the next task ahead for the UFO community might be to change the public's perception and try to remove the stigma, because you'd think that the scientific community would be stumbling over themselves to get to this information to figure out electromagnetic propulsion or whatever it is they're using, but people, due to the stigma, won't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Well, remember that the stigma, look, as I said, I've been out there. I've said very strong things, and I haven't felt the stigma. And so that was one thing that I noticed in the show the other night, that they were worried about the stigma, afraid to take that final step and use the word alien, extraterrestrial. No, we can't say that. Well, I've been out there. After the first 700 lectures, and I come on very strong, people are quite willing and able to accept that. I got asked in front of a full house at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. It's about 600 people crowded with people even sitting in the aisles. How about asking this audience, I was asked, this is at the end of my lecture, where they stand on the subject. I had presented some Gallup poll data and some other polls of engineers and scientists and so forth. And I hesitated. I said, well, look, I usually stick my neck out. I don't ask the audience to stick their neck out. Well, I don't think anybody will mind, so they asked the question. Better than 90% said they thought some UFOs are alien spacecraft.
Yeah.
Not 10%, 90%.
Right.
So I try to encourage people, speak up, but have your facts in hand before putting your mouth in gear. That's all.
Right.
Great. And
all right, well,
the
thank
problem.
you, and I'll let you guys go. And Martin, you do a great show. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks,
and Andrew, I do
right.
appreciate those great questions. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. So, yeah, I think, Kathy, do you want to weigh in on the stigma as well?
Well, I think that Donald Menzel, Philip Klass, and Edward Condon worked very, very hard to place that stigma on scientists, and did a lot in order to harm prominent scientists who studied this topic. But it's time for that to be over. Robert Bigelow is one of the scientists who is considering this and working on this very diligently. And he had a team of 46 scientists working on this. And he is making great advances in terms of building expandable kind of structures to go into space. And he's really moving along. And he is a shining example of someone who is not afraid to take the risks.
Right on.
Yeah,
Right
I saw
on.
that interview. I was very impressed. He said, I don't give a darn what people think. And I love that attitude. And all this time, I had no idea that he was involved in that secret program where he was actually getting the raw data. So,
I was amazed myself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised, because my first dealings with him were, 10, 15 years ago. I don't know. It's a long time. I was a young man.
So we're going to be changing the subject really soon. So if anyone that's listening live wants to call in and ask specific to what we're talking about right now, that number is 603-967-4030 if anyone wants to call in. Again, that's 603-967-4030. And a question we're talking now about, the Pentagon secret UFO search. We're going to be changing the subject and talking about other things. We have a caller coming in right now. A call coming in right now. And caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
My first name is Lee, and I'm calling from New York.
Lee, how are you, Lee Spiegel?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Lee.
So great to have you calling in.
Well, I just got home, and I really wanted to hear what the show was going to be about tonight. So I'm not sure. I'm sure I've missed some great stuff. And I actually have a question that I've always wanted to ask Stan and Kathy, and I've never done that before.
Oh, fire away.
Okay.
So, I mean, I admire you. You know, of course, how much I admire all the work that the two of you have done. I mean, really, I have all of your books, and there's a part of me that has always believed that some UFOs, as Stan very often says in his lectures, some UFOs are quite possibly somebody else's spacecraft. I believe that as well. But Stan, you don't often talk about whether or not you think that UFOs could be from somewhere else, not interplanetary locations. And I'm curious to know how you and how Kathy, how you feel about whether or not some UFOs could be involved with other alternate realities or dimensions. Could they be coming from somewhere else that you don't always talk about?
Well, look, I talk about things I know something about. At least I try to. And I certainly allow for a great deal about UFOs that we don't know anything about. I think they may know a great deal about warping space and time. How do they get through walls without making holes in the walls? I mean, this is pretty far out stuff. But since I don't know how to do those things, I say, look, we're young, they're old, they've been at this a long time. I guarantee you that there will be things that they know about that we don't know about. But since I don't know about them, what can I say about them? Leave room.
So you would be open to the possibility that maybe they're not, or maybe all of them are not just coming from other planets. And when I say all of them, I mean, you know, the small percent that can't be explained, and that's a big number, that small percent.
Well, yeah, the biggest study, Blue Book Special Report 14, remember, 21.5%, even though the Air Force said even the unknown 3%. What's the difference between 3 and 21.5? I mean, a little deception here and there never hurt anybody, did it? Yeah, it did. As a matter of fact.
And also, I'm also curious. Do you feel that Project Blue Book never really ended?
Good question. I think they changed the name. Yeah, I mean, that's when I go back to Bollinger. Remember that reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system.
Right.
So where do the reports go that could affect national security?
Right.
I would say Majestic 12, and now I'd say the new stuff. So I certainly don't think we've had the full story told us. I would be astonished if they could, if they have told us the full story. You see, I'm a believer that security has a place in all this stuff. Do we want anybody around to be able to get his mitts on the technology that to duplicate UFO flight behavior? I don't think so. Scares the heck out of me. Somebody's going to use that in a war on this planet. Whether us or the Russians or the Chinese or who knows. So I think there's a place where you don't want some rogue guy on the outside saying, hey, I can work a little hard. I can figure out how these things work, and I'll take all these guys on. That scares me. Security has a role here.
Kathy, are you scared about anything like this?
Well, first of all, let me say that in terms of them being interdimensional, Lee, I have done a lot of investigations for the Mutual UFO Network and independently as well. And it just slaps you in the face. You can't turn away from it, that a lot of this is interdimensional. Craft phasing in and out, non-human entities phasing in and out. I have video of light orbs that appeared to be intelligently controlled that can be seen with the naked eye. And are also recorded on video. I have photographs of what appear to be non-human entities phasing, in the stage of phasing in or out. There's something going on here that is way beyond our understanding of science. And my big question is all of this interdimensional, or and are there interdimensional entities living on other planets, coming, say they're fifth dimensional and coming to our three-dimensional environment? Or are there entities who have interdimensional technology and are able to use that? But there's something going on here that is definitely interdimensional, and it is a little frightening to think about it, but reality is reality. You have to face it and try to figure out, try to solve the problem as scientifically as possible. And that's something that FREE, I think, is working on. The Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters with people like Dr. Rudy Shield, Claude Swanson. Dr. Claude Swanson is another one who are working on this sort of thing, I think.
Maybe.
And Martin, Martin, can I ask you a question?
Yes, I just had a little comment to make about that, but go ahead, ask me the question.
Well, the question for you, Martin, is I think your audience would probably be interested to know how you feel about this. Like, is there anything about the UFO subject that either frightens you or makes you want to give it up? Because I've had many times in my life where I've wanted to just put it aside and not go anywhere near it anymore.
Oh, I do get that. Perhaps I haven't been at it long enough, to feel that. As of right now, I still feel as though it's fascinating, and I love to hear the stories. I love to hear people's thoughts on what it may be. And as Kathy was talking just then, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if interdimensional is somehow linked to travel. I like what Jacques Vallée says is, it's probably something we don't even know about or understand. And that's, and I've said this a number of times, probably something we have not even thought of yet could be part of it as well. So...
you mean we don't know it all? Come on.
But I love this. There's a quote. I don't know if Stan has already given you this quote today, but I always quote Stan Friedman on one thing that he says, I think, at every single lecture he ever gives. And that quote is, he says, when somebody says that bit of UFO behavior is impossible, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to do that. And if I don't know how to do that, well, then it must be impossible.
I think you sort of touched on something like that, Stan, earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was a mistake I was making too, by the way, Lee. Lee, I love when you call in, and thanks so much. I really, it's always great having you on the show.
It's great to hear your voices. Now I'm going to go listen to the rest of the show. Okay.
All right.
Happy New Year.
All right.
Thank you. Same to you. Same to you, all of you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Lee. Take care. All right. So we had a couple people trying to call in, and we are getting ready to change the subject. So if those people would like to try back again, that number is 603-967-4030. And I will just put that in the chat room as well. Yeah, we had a couple of people trying to call in, and yeah, I think one part of the question that I didn't answer, and that was, does anything scare me? And right now, I would say I can't think of anything unless I ever saw some type of aggression, and we haven't really seen much of that, or there isn't too many cases where there's aggression. We have another caller on the line. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
I'm Matt. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm a computer science student and part-time physicist on my free time, but I wanted to call in, kind of get a few facts straight before I mention my idea. And if it's all right, I'm going to kind of continue what you guys were talking about last, but also talk to Stan and Margaret and Catherine about nuclear physics, if they have time for a couple questions.
Sure, yeah, go ahead, fire.
All right. So to get my one fact straight that I need to know from Martin, we saw a UFO that was separated under the water and above the water at one time. Was that reported correctly?
That wasn't my sighting, no. Not in particular.
Okay, I know it wasn't your sighting, but I heard about it from you and another
Robert
in
Powell.
another video.
Robert
Yes.
Powell, and that was the Puerto Rican UFO. It mysteriously appeared to go under the water and back out of the water.
All right, that makes sense. All right, and I wanted to talk quickly to Stan about molten saltwater fusion reactors. If molten fusion reactors being used for this power source, would you have to displace the superheated water and pick up more salt water at a point?
I don't know. I haven't looked at salt water as a means for any of this stuff going on.
All right. I've been working on the theory a little bit about that, and about more. I think that there are the one vehicles that we keep seeing that everyone has kind of led to saying that they're the interdimensional ones, the perfectly saucer-shaped ones that have the aura around them that we believe is more included to being the interdimensional beings. And then we also have the V-shaped aircraft that we've seen more and higher in the sky, like the Phoenix Lights, for example. That was more something that we've said that is probably not those small saucers, but an actual larger craft.
Well, I think there are motherships here too. You know, we got to allow room for them.
I mean, most definitely, I believe that was one of the case with that. I've been working in my part-time on an idea of plasmatic superconductive entanglement. It is where we use, instead of just having a plasma source being able to control the airspeed, leveling, and stuff like that, what it is possible because of these events where we've seen these crafts either go into the water or go towards water for saltwater capabilities. If it was an idea of entanglement and an idea of having a craft as a separate device where it can either go into a wave state or a particle state, that would be able to create it in the possibility to be able to go through walls and those other events that we have seen that we can't explain. And I don't know if anyone's...
I don't have a good answer for that question, but I would say this, that I certainly need to point out that seawater is an electrically conducting fluid, and air plasma is an electrically conducting fluid. There was built an electromagnetic submarine that operated in salt water. Westinghouse Research Lab scientist Stuart Way built one of these, and they published a paper about them. I want to make sure that you understand the analogy I'm trying to make between electrically conducting fluid, seawater on the one hand, and ionized air on the other. It's part and parcel of the same idea.
Whoops. Stan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Just had I think we just lost Matt. Matt, thanks for the call. Interesting. And all right, so let's see. We have a guy that's been trying to call in over and over again, and we keep missing him. And I'm sure he will be calling in. So we're going to be changing the subject. I wanted to, something I've never had you both on at one time. Now, Kathy, when I first met you, I was actually at your house in Newburyport, Mass., and we talked about the Betty and Barney Hill case. So that's the subject I want to go in, but we have this guy who's been trying to call. Here he is, finally. Okay. All right, caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
This is Ryan from South Carolina.
Ryan, I'm sorry I couldn't take your call. You called the exact second right after someone else did, so go ahead. You have a question for our guests?
Yeah, I do. I want to make a quick comment first to Stanton. I do want to say that even though Martin will tell you I am a skeptic, or what you would call a healthy agnostic, I do want to say I do appreciate your hard work and your honest, really good research you've done over the years on this topic. It's very much appreciated, even from skeptics like me.
Hey, I'm a skeptic.
Yeah. I wanted to say, ask you about something you talked about earlier. You had spoken about the perils of aliens contacting us, of whatever technology we got from them, we would just use to kill each other, which is probably true. But do you ever wonder why they don't make contact with us and give us more benign technology? I mean, for example, we already have nuclear weapons. Perhaps they could give us something like thorium reactors or potentially fusion. We already have the H-bomb or something like that could solve our environmental and energy issues.
Well, I think that they're here because they're concerned about us, because we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. 50 million killed in one war is saying a heck of a lot about us, none of it good, really. I think that the Galactic Federation wants to make sure that people on one planet, beings on one planet, don't go to war and use their technology to beat up on beings from another planet. That's the only way we solve our problems on this planet. Let's have a little war, and I'll take over your land, and then somebody else will come along and do the same thing. And I hope that there are parts of the neighborhood where they've gone past that stage, where they recognize we have to learn to get along with each other because we have the capability of destroying so much so readily. So I think that aliens wouldn't dare to give us technology. Why would anybody trust us? With our track record, as I said, 50 million in one war, 1,700 cities destroyed in that one war, a budget this year of $1 trillion on things military. How could they give us any technology? I think what they want to do is make sure we don't spread our brand of friendship, which everybody else calls hostility. In other words, I think we're a rogue place. Maybe this is the devil's island of this corner of the galaxy. They dumped all the bad boys and girls here, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. I don't know. But let's hope. We've only had sophisticated technology for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years. You plan it any way you want. The planet's been around 4 billion years. So surely others, and the universe at least 13 billion, surely others have decided that, you know what, spending all our effort killing each other doesn't make a lot of sense, guys. Maybe we ought to grow up a little bit. And so, that's what I don't think that they consider. I don't talk to the ants, or even the rabbits, which have intelligence, but limited technology. So I would be astonished if aliens would be willing to give us anything. They've given us an example. We know that there are other beings out there, even though governments may not want to say that very loudly. They did very recently, a couple of weeks ago. So I don't expect them. I can't see any point at all in their giving us any kind of technology.
Along those lines, I'd like to thank you for your call, Ryan.
I would like to say, kind of as a follow-up, that, I mentioned benign technology, technology possible we could turn to weapons, that even in that case, I mean, possibly they would sit back and they would think that, anything we give them, I mean, or any place we land, it's just going to further divide them. You know what I mean? I mean, if they landed in New York, somebody's going to say, "Why didn't you land in Beijing?" Or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for taking it. Pleasure to speak to you.
All right. So along those lines, I wanted to ask what you thought about part of what the government supposedly was doing in this study was, and also to what To the Stars is planning on doing is to do like reverse engineering or somehow to figure out, how to duplicate the technology they're seeing. So I wanted to think.
Well, who's going to pay for it, and who's going to protect it so that idiots on the planet don't get their hands on it?
So in a private company, you can't really protect, something from getting out.
Well, that's about the size of it. I would very greatly concern me that somebody figures out how to be like these guys and uses it to swat the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. And our technological development would have to be pretty close to theirs for us to be able to back engineer it. So that's something that you have to consider.
Yeah.
Yes. Good point, Kathy.
Yeah, that is
Very
a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into Betty and Barney land. I would say probably 95% of the people listening right now are familiar with the case. But in a nutshell, let's just talk about what happened. Kathy, go ahead and just, if you can, as quickly as you can, summarize what happened back in 1961.
Yes.
Okay.
September 1961, Betty and Barney are returning from a vacation to Niagara Falls, and then they went up to Montreal, Toronto first, and then they decided to, instead of staying in Montreal, to drive home. And along the way, they had a close encounter with a flying disc. It came within 100 feet of their vehicle. Barney got out of the car, looked at it through binoculars. It descended even lower. Something started to drop out of the bottom. He had conscious recall of observing non-human entities looking down at him, ran back to the car in a state of terror. He and Betty heard code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car, caused the car to vibrate, caused a tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. And the next thing they know, they were 35 miles down the highway. They had spotty memories of encountering a roadblock somewhere along the way. They didn't know when or where it occurred. They had memories of a second series of buzzing sounds, memories of a fiery orb that seemed to be sitting on the ground. And when they arrived home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, it was 2 to 3 hours later than their anticipated arrival time. Betty's dress was torn. There were magnetic spots on the trunk of the car. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to buy new shoes. Their watches were no longer working, never worked again, and caused many problems for them.
Wow, that was really good. Have you ever done one that short?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah.
Nobody better at it.
Yeah, that's right. So, by the way, the listener that doesn't know this, this is Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Marden, speaking right now. Kathy, wasn't it like the next day you heard from your aunt? I mean, you heard this was happening?
Well, it was actually the day they arrived home. This happened on the night of the 19th and into the early morning hours of the 20th. The abduction was around from midnight, a little after, until about 2 to 2:30 in the morning. And so I heard about it that afternoon when Betty called my mother. I was home from school.
And what did you were a young child, what did you think at the time?
I was 13 years old, and I was very curious and fascinated by this.
And was it talk among your family quietly? Because I know this didn't actually come out for a while.
Yes, we were told that we could not repeat anything that we heard, that they would tell us what they knew, what they learned as they explored this, but that we could not repeat it. So we had to speak only within the family about it.
Now, how
comes the word?
Yeah, how big was your family? Did you have siblings?
I had 2 brothers who were younger than I was. I am. My mother, my father, I had aunts and uncles and cousins. My grandparents lived across the street from me. These are Betty's parents. So I had quite a few family members that I could talk to.
And did
about
everyone
this.
actually keep it in? Did it stay the family secret, so to speak?
As far as I know, it did. Betty and Barney told some of their friends. They told the Air Force. They told scientists. They told NICAP, and eventually there was a violation of confidentiality. Betty and Barney spoke to the two-state study group in Quincy, Massachusetts, about their sighting, and Betty spoke a little bit about how her dream was the same as part of her sighting, and that it kind of leaked out from there. One of Betty's new friends, who was a UFO investigator, ended up talking to a newspaper reporter by the name of John Luttrell, and he contacted Betty and Barney, and he wrote them a letter, in fact, and he said that he used her name, and he said he'd been talking to her, and that he wanted to talk with them if they were anywhere near as nice as this woman said that they were, then he knew that he would enjoy the discussion. He even promised them that he would not make this a material or a commercial venture whatsoever if they would only talk to him. And they said, absolutely not. We don't want anyone to know about this. We could lose our jobs. And lo and behold, only a couple of months after he talked to them, it came out in the Boston Traveler, and it was carried for 5 nights or 5 days in a row.
Wow.
And really caused a big stir. Betty and Barney were extremely upset about this. They came down to my grandparents' house that night, and we had a family meeting in the dining room of my grandparents' house. And as a family, we talked about it and had to decide what to do next. Should Betty and Barney go public with this, since the cat was already out of the bag? Or should they deny it? And finally, we decided as a family that they should go public with it. I was all for it at the time. I was, I guess, about 17 years old at that time, and I was in favor of it. I had no knowledge whatsoever of what the consequences would be.
Right.
And unfortunately, there were consequences for going public.
Now, once you had the go-ahead, like everybody could talk about it, did you talk to your friends and did people find out, like at your high school, and treat you differently or anything?
Well, I was graduating from high school then, so I guess maybe I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little bit of teasing, such as in the class prophecy. I think I was going to be an astronaut going up into space, and I really had no desire to become an astronaut. Betty and Barney attended my high school graduation with a photographer from Look magazine, because John Fuller had gotten permission to write the first book, and he was writing 2 articles for Look magazine in order to promote the book. And so this photographer was at my high school graduation and at the family party after.
Wow, the interrupted journey.
Yes.
And Stan, when is the first that you heard about did you hear about it right when it became public?
Well, I read the book, The Interrupted Journey, and then I had a chance to meet with Betty and Barney. That came about rather strangely. I was living in Pittsburgh, and doing a lot of media stuff. And I was on the biggest radio TV station in town, KDKA, and they told me, they had me on several shows. They trusted me. We had a good group there of professional people. And they told me, they contacted me, let me know that Betty and Barney were coming to town, and told me where they were staying, which was very unusual. They trusted me, as I say, and I had called them and had dinner with them. And that's when I met them. I listened very carefully to see anything that was different from what was in the book, and stuff like that. So I was very favorably impressed. And then I got another way into the story. Marjorie Fish was doing her work on the star map, and she asked Coral Lorenzen, the head of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, which was more interested in abductions than NICAP was, the two competing major groups. And Coral asked me, she said, Marjorie Fish wanted to talk to a scientist to get some help on certain aspects of the star map stuff, and could she recommend anybody? And she recommended me. So I met with Marjorie. I was traveling a lot, and so I had a chance to be in Toledo, Ohio at that time. And I was the first to publish about the star map. And I got Astronomy Magazine, Terry Dickinson, the editor, to do the fine article that he did. And so I was heavily involved with this. I couldn't dodge it, in other words, once we got started. And I was so pleased. And the response to the star map article was great. And sure, there were some debunkers around, but they're always about, you can't get rid of them. So, Kathy, how long ago was that we met? My goodness.
Many, many years ago, Stan, at least 30, maybe more. 40?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I don't know. With Marjorie, it was in the early 70s, I believe. And how could you not go on with this stuff? And because I was lecturing so much, I used the story. People told me their stories. So I became kind of the go-to guy with strange stories, if you will. And Kathy and I have been working together. We found we thought alike. We're both Leos. I shouldn't say that.
Oh, that's funny.
But no, it turns out that we're quite compatible in terms of our thinking about these things. I'm a physical scientist. She's a social scientist. So it makes a good combination because there are certainly both physical science and social science aspects to the story, to the whole business of ufology,
Absolutely.
for that matter.
Now, Kathy, you called in when I had, do I want to call him a debunker? Or someone that just wasn't buying the whole Betty and Barney story. So what, besides, that was James McDonald, not the one in UFOs, but in New Hampshire. So what are some of the other people saying that you've had to defend, the Betty and Barney Hill story? Because I know you wrote a blog recently about that.
Yes, I did. And it really started when with Philip Klass. And initially, his first book, he tried to explain it all away as plasma, that it was maybe plasma on the power lines that Betty and Barney were seeing, and ball lightning. And it just flicked off and on, and there were just these little lights. So he started to change the entire story. And he dissected, I believe, every tiny bit of that story and built a new false scenario that was publicized and was picked up by others, and unfortunately was picked up by scientists who did not do their homework and repeated over and over. And he not only changed the story into a false myth, but he also attempted to destroy Betty and Barney as people and to destroy their credibility. And Barney died when he was very young. He was only 46 years old, died from a massive cerebral hemorrhage in February of 1969. And the movie did not come out until 1975, the UFO incident, starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons. And when that movie was about to be released, he wrote a letter, Philip Klass did, stating that this was now going to go out to millions of people, and therefore there had to be a major debunking campaign against this, because you did not want to frighten people. You wanted people to think that this wasn't real. And one of the things that has been repeated is that there were no other witnesses. And I'm very, very proud to say that Stanton found a letter, and that letter was written on July 7th, 1976. But we did not know about it when we wrote captured. I'm not sure what the date was when Stanton gave it to me, but I think that it was in some of his papers when we were writing our latest book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. But in this letter, it was from John Luttrell to Stanton, and I quote, Luttrell wrote, "I can recall interviewing between 12 and 14 different people from different communities surrounding Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, none of whom knew one another, but all of whom remembered experiencing the same sighting at the same time the Hills did in the same location." So,
wow.
Maybe Luttrell, I was angry at him for years for what he did, but when I found this letter, I said, well, there is one redeeming point. He found
Isn't that something?
Independent people who had all observed the same disc-shaped object in the same location.
Wow. No, that's definitely part of the story I haven't heard. I want to stay with the story, but I do want to ask Stan this question because I know Stan has talked about Philip Klass a number of times. Stan, what do you think motivated Philip to be as strong-headed of a debunker as he was?
Well, I've always wondered. He always said he didn't work for a three-letter agency, and I keep saying, so tell me the four letters. No, I am pretty much convinced that he may have felt he had to do that because he was working for some agency. I mean, if you were going to pick somebody to attack UFOs, Phil was ideal. He was based in Washington. He was a senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, very fast typist, fine writer, an ideal man to try to debunk this whole business. And he would stoop to any, as low as you can get. And, he and I had dinner together on occasion. We socialized a little bit and stuff. But I also have to give him credit for being honest about one thing. He challenged me on the Betty and Barney Hill star map work, and the article he made me a bet, a challenge. He'd give me $100 each for every example I could find of documents done in the same size and style type as were used in an Air Force letter about the case, a very important letter. And he challenged me, and up to a maximum of 10, I'll give you $100 each. And as it happens, I found 14. And I gave him copies and an invoice, and he paid me. and I have to give him credit for paying me.
Mm-hmm.
But he got very angry when I showed a copy of his check at one of my lectures.
Right.
He didn't want anybody to know, in other words,
Yeah.
that he had paid off. But and it was typical. He had no basis for it. He had 9 letters done in the same size and style, elite type, and so he said what I showed was done in pica type, and that was no good. It had to be elite type. Blah 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 blah. That's when he offered me the $100 each. So I went to my files and found 20 of the pica type. And then I went back to the archives of the Eisenhower Library and found the 14. And no question, I got them from there, made copies, sent him copies. So Phil was a zealot, very much of a zealot. And I can't help but believe he was doing work for somebody, but I can't prove it.
Well, it's
But
another...
he came on so strong.
Right. There's another situation where when I interviewed Steve Pierce from the Travis Walton case, years ago, he said that Philip offered him $10,000 to say it was a hoax. Now, why would someone, a private person with their own funding offer, if that story is true, why would he offer them that kind of money, and where would that money be coming from? I mean, I don't think someone just throws around the money like that.
Phil was pretty well off. He wasn't married until late in life. He did a lot of extra writing. He could afford it. I don't feel sorry for him about that.
Yeah.
But he was, in our book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, we go into Phil and Donald Menzel and Edward Condon. Now, we could understand Menzel, Harvard University professor of astronomy, total debunker, and then I discovered my proudest discovery. He wrote to Jack Kennedy. They knew each other. They even had breakfast together on occasion. I discovered that this letter that Menzel wrote to Kennedy saying, there's one area, after Kennedy was elected president, that I may be able to be of assistance to you. I've had a longer continuous association with the National Security Agency, 30 years, of anybody. When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. That Menzel had a connection with the NSA was total shock to everybody. And I had people in ufology tell me they didn't believe it. I showed them the letter. And I got it at the Harvard Archives. There was no question about its authenticity. But so Menzel I could understand. He was serving his country. It turns out he'd been in naval intelligence. He did all kinds of highly classified work that nobody knew about.
Yeah.
But so where's the excuse for class, you see?
Yeah.
And Condon was a fine scientist. As a physicist, I have to say that. He was president of the American Physical Society, and in a different time period, president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He was a real scientist. He said some very stupid things, though, which I can't understand. Kathy has this down pat. What was that darn stupid thing he said, Kathy, about the travel?
Oh my gosh, Stan, it's been so long since I've said it. Now you've put me on the spot. I think he said it is safe to assume that no intelligent life from elsewhere has any chance of reaching our either planet or solar system in the next 10,000 years.
How can any rational scientist say that?
That's just like saying the lighter than air craft will never exist, the year before.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's get back to Betty and Barney. We only have about 10 minutes left, which it doesn't give us too much time. So that, Kathy, I wanted to ask you, so after they came out with this, what was the aftermath like for them personally? Initially,
they felt that they had a lot more support than they had anticipated. There was a lot of support. There were military people who were very much interested in this, and they became close to Admiral Herbert Knowles, and who had retired at that time, he was Rear Admiral. And then also Wilbert Smith from the Canadian
Canada.
government.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and had regular meetings with these officials. And, so they received a lot of support. There were actually high-level people, scientists and military, who believed their story and who wanted to learn as much as they could, and also for Betty and Barney to learn from them about what they knew. So that was very, very good. But, then eventually you had just these debunkers. I don't even like to call some of them debunkers because they're not taking the bunk out of anything. They're putting the bunk into the story. I like to call them disinformants because that's exactly what Philip Klass and some of the others are doing.
Right.
And
so you said that they had like people of science that were actually looking into this and paying attention. Was there, I don't know how science can actually research anything that's elusive the way it was, but were they...
The star map was one.
I see. Uh-huh.
There were also a lot of questions about the craft.
I see, really?
To describe the craft. They wanted to learn all they could about that craft.
Now,
yes.
About the craft, what type of information did they retain about that? I mean, I know the windows and the creatures? Wasn't there? Did this come out in hypnosis, or was this something that they remembered like real time?
Well, Barney remembered observing the non-humans real time, and also the craft as it hovered about 50 feet away from him. But then the part that many scientists were really interested in is not only that it hovered and it didn't make a sound and the flight patterns and all of that, but also the interior of the craft, what they saw, when it landed, what was it sitting on? How did they get onto the craft? It was divided up like a piece of pie with a cylinder going through the center, it seemed. So there were many questions about that, the lighting. What was the lighting like? There were no light fixtures. The kind of bluish white light seemed to come through the walls. All of the walls were illuminated.
Wow.
So,
Now, I know you mentioned there were buzzing noises. Was the craft actually making that buzzing noise as far as they knew?
It seemed that the craft was at that point hovering over the car as Barney was speeding down the highway, trying to get away from it. And the buzzing sounds appeared to be striking the trunk of the vehicle. And that is the area where there were those shiny spots that caused a compass needle to spin and spin, indicating, as Dr. Bruce Maccabee wrote in the foreword to our book, counter-rotating magnetic fields. And according to MUFON, they have seen this in other cases.
Now, when the movie came out, what was the name of the movie? It wasn't Captured. What?
No, it was the UFO incident.
The UFO incident. I actually saw that on TV when that came out, and I remember feeling like chilled about it. How did that change their life after that came out? That's really going public.
It absolutely was. Barney was deceased at that time. He died in 1969. So that was, it was Betty who was very, I guess, pleased that the movie was made, but at the same time, the movie gave the impression that they remembered absolutely nothing except for a light in the sky, and that it was all came out under hypnosis. So that was very confusing to the American public. They didn't fully understand what did happen. But it was done that way in order to leave a question in the public's mind so that the opportunity was there for them to doubt that it did happen. And James Earl Jones did not want to have a movie that would frighten the public.
Really?
That's what Betty explained to me, yes.
How about that? Stan, have you ever listened to the tapes of the hypnosis?
Some of them, not all of them.
Yeah. And
I met Betty and Barney. I mean, I talked to Barney. I was very impressed, and particularly with regard to the star map stuff, trying to figure out what was going on. I mean, the key point to me was my first interaction with them when we had dinner and stuff. I trusted them.
Mm-hmm.
I was very favorably impressed with them. I mean, people tend to forget, Betty's a social worker. You know, she's not somebody who was sweeping the floor. In that position, she has to talk all kinds of things to all kinds of people and win their confidence and be truthful and careful and trustworthy and all that sort of stuff. I was very impressed. And remember, Barney was on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission. And Betty went with Barney to, was it Lyndon Johnson's? I was going to say Annunciation. That's the wrong word.
I did as well. I helped on that campaign too, and the three of us were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration.
Wow. How did their careers, how did this affect their careers when all this came out, Kathy?
Well, the interesting thing is that they were not fired. Betty's supervisor was interviewed by the media, and he said that Betty was a very fine social worker and that he wished he had more just like her.
Wow, that's great.
So that was great. She received a promotion to supervisor, and Barney did fine in his career as well. So it didn't seem to be the problem that they had anticipated it would be.
What about the ridicule part of it?
Well,
what ridicule?
The ridicule from the debunkers. You know, once I said to Betty, why don't you just sue for defamation of character? And she just said, why do I want to spend my money and go through all of that, you know, emotional distress?
That's right.
To take them to court. She said they're obviously lying, but you just have to say they're entitled to their own opinion.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you can't change someone's mind when they have that, you know, when they have their mind already made up. Yeah, she had the right attitude, I believe. But so we're at the end of the show, and Stan, if you would, can you give out your website address?
Yes, www.stantonfriedman.com. That's FRIEDMAN.com. And it lists my books. It tells you how to reach me. And you know, we're interested in hearing more stories, too, from people who've had experiences. But and there's the book Captured, of course, which has the update on the interrupted journey by how many years? 40?
And a lot more information, yes, than was in the interrupted journey. That stopped in 1966, and this goes all the way up to 2004.
Wow. And Kathy, your website, please?
Yes, it's Kathleen, Kathleen -, Marden, MARDEN.com. And all of our books are for sale on my website. You can also visit the upcoming events to see where I will be and where Stan will be with me on many of these. So, and also some free articles that you can read on my research and on the hills.
Excellent. Great. Well, I will be seeing you in a nice warm place in Phoenix, Arizona in about a month and a half.
Yes, that would
yeah.
be nice.
And excellent. Thanks so much, and Happy New Year to you both. And I really enjoyed this evening show.
We did
Thanks
as well.
much.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you
All right.
and all the listeners.
All right. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next week. I'm pretty excited how the timing worked out on this. We'll be back next week with John Alexander, Dr. John Alexander. So again, it'll be a great show, and I'm looking forward to it. Anyone can support the show, even if you're listening on YouTube or the Dark Matter Digital Network. All you have to do is go to podcastufo.com. The information's there for $2 or more a month. We'd appreciate it. We have a lot of expenses to run the show, and we do have someone coming on to help us with the production of the shows. Thanks again, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.